I wanted to introduce our next speaker. He is a dynamic data storyteller, and he's skilled in transforming complex data into compelling visuals and strategies to improve business performance. Please give a warm, integrate welcome to Jon Lorenzini, founder of Crabber. Yes, okay.
Hey guys. Oh, look at this enthusiasm right after lunch. I like it. First, let me start off by saying what a good-looking crowd this is, right? Compliment the audience. Perfect. Check. All right, so I'm Jon Lorenzini. I spoke at last year's Integrate. How many were there last year? Okay, so you might recognize some of the slides if you showed up to my session. I don't know if you didn't, don't tell me. But I wanted to talk about complex communication. The title is kind of lame, but what I've learned is I was really bad at this when I graduated. This was something that was the hardest thing for me to learn over the course of my career. So I wanted to just be like, hey, you guys don't have to be like me and make all these mistakes. So that's the framing and kind of how I'm going to go through things. I'm going to show you some bad examples that I did and then what I've learned and how I'm changing and modifying that now. So first we're going to go through this point by point. You can see here it's all really, really simple. And this is how I would start presentations when I first graduated. I was in the weeds, I was really, really involved, and you go, why is no one understanding this? You know, why don't they just see obviously what I see? You know, and this was something that took me some time. So obviously we're not going to go through this because that would be terribly boring. And actually, I don't know, is this velocity or I don't know. So we're going to start with a video. Way more fun, way more exciting. So let's go ahead and kick that off. Yeah, well, that's a little too in the weeds. We'll move on. But you guys get the idea is that, you know, oops, come on. All right. So I guess the big point is, you know, even though I was in analytics at, you know, Google and Facebook here, is that the analytics, the numbers, kind of boring and doesn't stick with people. It's how do you convert that into a good story? How do you make people resonate and remember what you're trying to say? Less is more when it comes to statistics. We have something which I'll go through later. It's the BFD, the big effing deal. And that's one statistic that jumps out at you that says, this is everything that I'm trying to prove to you without throwing, you know, the kitchen sink at them, proving your point hundreds of times over. So who is this guy? My current role, I'm the founder of Crabber. It's a travel startup. Think Spotify, you know how you have your smart playlist, you listen to a couple songs, and then it automatically makes a playlist for you. It's the same thing, but for points of interest. So it learns what you like, and then if you're traveling to a different city, curates the perfect trip for you. I also have Lorenzini Ad Tech. That's just to pay the bills. If you guys need any consulting work, you know, let me know. Hit me up. Before that, I was at Facebook. I was a marketing science manager for global CPG, ran a small team. We were looking at Pepsi, Anheuser-Busch. You know, if they spend a couple $1 million on Facebook, how many Pepsis are sold in a bodega? Questions like that. So, with Google, I was an analytical lead, food, beverage, restaurants, and then a brand measurement lead for Reach. So some of the slides I'm going to go through are directly copy-pasted from some of my presentations. Earlier in my career, the bad ones. Later in my career, hopefully the good ones. You guys decide. And then before that, I was agency side, and even before that, I worked in a brewery filling cans with beer. So we're kind of all over the map here. So I also run an advertising and marketing analyst group. This is my way to hang out with all my old coworkers from jumping around jobs. It's a bunch of nerds. We all geek out. It's first Tuesday of the month. We all hang out. It's because my friends get really sick of me talking about data. So this is like a safe space for me to be able to say, like, let's geek out and go super in the weeds. Forget the storytelling. Let's talk data all day. So that's the group. That was one of the meetings we had at Facebook. So first I'm going to go through some things because we got to start with the story. First you got to like me, right, to be able to want to agree with me according to that video. So here's some things that I did. I like to pull pranks. So here's some things that kind of hit the front page of things. So Huffington Post, right before the election, I stayed at the Trump Hotel. I felt a little guilty, so I had them put a framed picture of Hillary Clinton bedside. They did it. I took a picture. It went all over the internet. People were, yeah. There you go. See, I like the heckling. You guys can heckle me. It'll be really fun. But yeah, what was really interesting and what really made it blow up was that the people that are in the Trump camp are like, look at the property, they're willing to cater to someone, this is a really great property. And then the Hillary camp, it's like, no, the employees are probably underpaid and blah, 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 and they hate Trump and they thought this was great. So it actually formed a lot of debate. So it was really interesting that this kind of got picked up by a bunch of news organizations, and I was doing interviews for some silly little prank that I just thought was funny. Another one was one of my friends owns a dive bar, and he reviews Yelp reviewers. So someone gave him a 1-star rating. So he went in and said, I give your review 1 star because you're not able to find the appropriate place to catch up with your friends. I see you like brunches and quiet places and cafes. This is not that place. And then finally, I have an Airhorn prank video. It has over 160,000 views. I taped a bunch of air horns to the bottom of people's chairs in the office. And you can watch that. And so I like pulling pranks. This is a little bit about me. Oh, this should have been a build. I also do glass blowing. I decorate cakes. And I play inner tube water polo. So that's a little bit about me. I'm really weird. I'm a really weird guy. Cool. Oh, there's the build. Okay, so why did I share all that? What does that have to do with statistics or telling story or telling a complex story? It's that we're starting off on a good note, At least I hope so. I mean, we're laughing, we're having a good time. So hopefully it'll make it more receptive. When I first started, I would jump right into the numbers and I'd be like, this is what you need to do and this is why you need to do it. Just do this, blah, blah, blah. And they'd be like, I don't know who the heck you are, guy. Like, what are you trying to do here? So making sure you have like a personal element, maybe not as much. I'm not going to show inner tube water polo to a client, but it's something that gets things off and like makes it a little bit more human. So with the left brain and the right brain, another way of phrasing it is thinking fast and slow with the type 1 brain and the type 2 brain. Are you guys familiar with this concept? So Daniel Kahneman, he's a behavioral economist. He won the Nobel Prize. And the two different systems, system 1 is your lazy brain. This is, when you go to drive a car, you don't have to think, take out the key, put it in the ignition, turn, hit the gas. It's just this automatic reflexive feedback. And then your second brain, your second system, type 2, is your intense analytical thinking brain. So the emotional brain that we saw in the video earlier versus the logic brain, the emotional brain generally is the first one to react, and it's the one that happens most of the time. It's only when you really need to use that type 2 brain do you do it, because it requires a lot of work. When you're studying for long hours, you're exhausted because you're using your type 2 as opposed to your type 1. And you can see here, this is like the difference in the brain systems here. And I think that what I like about this in behavioral economics is marketing, advertising, all those things fall under, do people behave rationally? Or if you're an expensive product that's exactly the same as something else, like the brandless example that we had the other day, you're paying more for the same thing. That's irrational. To an economist, they're like, people always act in their best interest, maximize their utility curve, blah, blah, blah. But that's not the case. People are emotional and react to things, messages, and brands, which is what advertising is. So another way to phrase this is speaking to the elephant. Are you guys familiar with the elephant and the rider? So the elephant, again, is your type 1, is your emotional response to things. And everyone thinks, oh, the person who's riding the elephant is the one in control. But actually, it's the elephant that's in control, and the rider occasionally steers things. So making sure you're talking to your audience, speaking to your clients, and being able to relate to them first will make them much more receptive for the messages that you're trying to send them. So storytell. I like to think of 3 S's: storytell, simplify, and something about audience. So I couldn't think of a third S that fit audience, so I just said something. So these are the ways that I always want to make sure I gut check my presentations before putting it out there. So here's another example that I really, really like. Are you guys familiar with Lucid Chart? It's the flow charting software. They could go through their product and show all their features, piece by piece, but instead they decided to show it in such a way that's both entertaining and features all their products' capabilities. So you could put images in, you could change the color, you can bold. It's going through all the different features, animated GIFs you could put in there. So I think this ability to tell the story of what this product can do is fun. But right, I mean, I watch this for fun, and it's a commercial. Oh, there's the animated. Oh, there's the commenting feature. But they go through a whole bunch of different features. They have like the chat function, the version history, like when you go back to the chorus. So it was a really, really great way to kind of share that with people, and I've watched that a bunch of times. They also have a really good one on dogs, the different types of doggos, if you want to check that out. Cool, so this is something I ripped right off of Getty Images, obviously. You can see I'm gonna pretend like I'm the person in the front of the room, because right now I am. And when I first started my career, I always thought that guy was a jerk. You know, the one who's on their phone, who's, you know, with their laptop up in a meeting. But as I continued on my career, I just realized I'm really boring. You know, if you guys are looking down at your phone and not paying attention, either my content is really long, boring, and droning, or it's something really important's going on, or I guess you could be a jerk. But the idea is to make things more interesting. So what was that ad without, anyone know? Right, well, exactly, and it only flashed for a second, right? They have the color branded and the giant T, so no real words or text here, just really strong branding. So this is something that when you're thinking about digital advertising and marketing, people are scrolling through things rapid fire, right? If you want someone to pause on your ad and you're trying to tell a complicated story, they've already moved on. If you're scrolling through this fast and you see that magenta, you know it's a T-Mobile ad. That's what they're doing for upper funnel branding, and allows them to say, this is a T-Mobile ad. And this is something that, you know, we at Google and Facebook, a lot of our clients struggle with, is how do we have heavy branding in the first couple seconds that you have when someone's scrolling through this quick, but make it entertaining? Because here's the thing, if they skip it and they don't see your brand, was it an ad for you? Probably not. You know, they wouldn't know. But if they don't brand it at all, then, if they don't brand it at all, they'll skip it and never know it was you. If they brand it, then they might not like it and follow through watching the whole video or getting the complete message. So if you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it well enough. This is something that, you know, when my friends talk to me about cryptocurrencies and all that kind of stuff, I'm like, man, I don't get any of this. So for me, it's a matter of like, who can be so pithy and clear with what they're saying and relatable. So another example, I love this, Jay-Z's moment of clarity. I dumbed down for my audience to double my dollars. They criticize me for it, but they all yell holla. So, you know, this speaks to that same thing, is that if you talk super technical and super in the weeds, you have a very small audience. If you talk very general and you're able to have everyone in the room go, yeah, no, I understand that. This is a great way to explain it. You can expand, you know, your impact. And that's why he's a businessman. He's not a businessman, he's a businessman. So this is something that I'm going through right now with my travel startup. I'm applying to Y Combinator. Are you guys familiar with Y Combinator? It's one of the largest venture capital. It's almost like business school meets venture capital. They teach you, you know, the program, how to go through everything. And what I thought was really interesting, they have you fill out this form. They only give you 60 characters. That's half of a tweet, less than half of a tweet, to describe your company. Now let me tell you, if you're in the weeds and you're trying to start your own company, you want to say it does a million things and you want to talk about all the bells and whistles. They intentionally limit this because if you can't explain it simply, you don't really understand your own business. So here's an example of how I explained stuff when I was at Facebook for why engagement metrics are bad. Your likes, comments, and shares, you know, if you could redeem them at the likes, comment, shares bank for money, that'd be great. Unfortunately, you cannot. So this is the way that I explain it to clients. So this is the gray box of people who buy your stuff. And then this is the red box of people who like your ads. And these are the people that always like your ads. You know, when you post something to Facebook, your mom is always first person to like your post. That's that red box. Some of them buy your stuff, some of them don't. You know, maybe your mom believes everything you say. You know, some of your friends are like, I don't know about that. Fake news, whoever shouted that out earlier. So what happens is if you make a really, really good ad and all of a sudden now you have a whole bunch of more likes, great, you've expanded that box of people that are interested. It does show that, you know, your ad is more creative, it's probably better, more engaging, and people like it more, but does it relate to sales? Maybe a little bit of the people who buy your stuff and expanding that, but does it impact your bottom line? I don't know. So we always want to focus on the start and finish metrics. Everything in the middle could be noisy and full of clutter. So, you know, dollars in, dollars out. Those are the two metrics that businesses run on. They don't run on likes, unfortunately. So really what you want to focus on is expanding that box of people who buy your stuff. If more people are buying your stuff, you're growing your business. So this is how I explain it to clients very simply, no numbers. And then I'll put in all the numbers and say, okay, here's how everything fits together, and this is actually what's causing your lift. With Pepsi, they have the Uncle Drew video. They have a couple other videos that they've done, which are really engaging. Jeff Gordon, have you seen the Jeff Gordon Pepsi video a couple years back? Like, those are really entertaining, and definitely the red box exploded on that, but did it sell more Pepsis? Those are the kind of questions that we're trying to answer in the marketing sciences team, is to say, what is the actual lift of people who saw the ad versus didn't see the ad? And those are the kind of questions that relate directly to business, because you can go in there and give a whole bunch of charts. Here's a spike, here's a valley, this went up, this went down. If it doesn't relate to sales, or if it doesn't relate to business objectives of either growing your audience or something like that, it gets lost on people that are out of the weeds. People in the weeds love it, and I love it. If you want to go to my meetup, we could geek out about it. But it's making sure that you connect it to what they actually care about. So knowing your audience. Here's an example of a graph, obviously. This is the merchandise. Yeah, I know. Duh. This is merch sales for different types of Pokemon. Now, who is familiar with Pokemon? Okay, some of you are not. For the people that are not, you see red for Charmander, and you go, huh, what's bad about that? Red means bad. Oh, green means money, Bulbasaur. Okay, so, the colors and what you're choosing is reflective of your audience. If I'm talking to someone, in our demographics, or the people that who raise their hands, you can see these colors all make sense to you. If they don't, it's because you're not a Pokemon fan, and that makes sense. But the idea is to make conscious decisions of who's your audience and what are you trying to communicate in a way that's simple. So another example, and this is what I usually do as a grounding conversation with my clients. So when I was at Google, there's Company X, they have their product marketing within advertising, you have digital media, and then you have the publisher Google. That's really far down the chain. As you work your way up the chain, they care less and less about you. If you're Pepsi, you want that end cap in grocery stores in Kroger's, because guess what? You sell way more product than an ad on Google will. So your trade marketing and your product marketing, whatnot, much more important to them than our digital advertising. So when I'm framing the conversations, digital media, I might get in the weeds, geek out a little bit. Advertising, I'll geek out a little bit less, but broader picture. And as I work my way up the chain, I go, okay, this is what we need to talk about. So with Google as a data provider, we have a lot of information in terms of users and audiences and behaviors, and that could apply to the entire chain. So this is category dynamics, consumer behavior, brand perception. These are all things that impact the company's bottom line in all departments. So when I'm talking to the CEO or the CMO of one of these companies, I want to make sure that I'm talking on their level of something they care about, not how many clicks did you get on a Tuesday at 7 o'clock. They don't care. So here's my parents' test. These are my parents, Bonnie and Eddie. He's got a killer mustache. And what I'll do is I'll call them up, and I'm living in an apartment in Queens, unmarried, whatever. My parents and I don't have that much to talk about, very different lifestyles. So I always talk about work. So when I'm having a C-level meeting, I want to make sure that they understand the concepts, but now they're actually getting really, really good. They understand marketing really well. So I'm like, I need a new focus group, because they're like, oh wait, the diminishing returns if you invest too many GRPs and I'm like, God, now I can't talk to you guys about this stuff. So I always make sure I run those kind of things by my parents, because if my parents get it, hopefully a CEO will too. Yeah. So for example, this is one thing that I ran through. So this is the reach curves. Are you guys familiar with reach? Reaching your audience. It's the percentage of the people in your target audience that you're able to have a message push to them. In the x-axis here, this is your investment level, and on the y-axis, it's how many people you reach. And you can see TV's efficient. Your first dollar, if you're doing branding upper funnel, should probably be television, because it's cheap. The cost per 1,000 impressions is much lower, so you're able to get that reach quicker. But as we've seen in the other videos, like people are spending less time on TV. They're cord cutters. Who here is a cord cutter? Who doesn't pay for cable? So if you're investing in television, that ceiling of people you can reach is lower than your total population, and it's dropping down. With YouTube, it's a little bit more expensive from a CPM perspective, or cost per 1,000 impressions, and that's why your first dollar should probably be television when you're doing branding activities, but I always talk about our last dollar, and when do you spend too much on television that you should diversify your message across different platforms? Because your first television ad, everyone who sees it for the first time is a new person that's seeing it. Your 1,000th time, your heavy TV users are gonna see that ad over and over and over. I don't know if you've seen some commercials on television where you're like, this is the 10th time I've seen this thing. You know, it's not a good experience for anybody. No one likes that. So a way that I explain it, GRP is gross rating points. And what it is the percentage of your audience multiplied by the time they saw the ad equals GRPs, so gross rating points. So the bigger your audience, the more impressions you need to get in your target audience. I'm just using this not necessarily to explain, traditional media math, but rather to show, if you have 10% of your population see an ad 10 times, that's 100 GRPs, gross rating points. If you have 100% of your audience watch an ad once, that's also 100 gross rating points. So this is the way that I explain this concept very simply, and there's a much longer build to explain what are gross rating points and all that, so I'm not going to get into that. But I wanted to show that the numbers and the metrics that you end up with are the same, but the underlying business conditions are very, very different. So when I explain this in such an extreme case, they go, okay, I see why I have to diversify on multiple things so that I can hit that ceiling or hit the higher ceiling. So why I love working at Google and Facebook is because of the audiences. We have such granular level data on, and we can't go up to a user level, but at least we have behavior data and we understand kind of how things interact with each other. So I'll show you a couple examples. So, before we get into it, I want to say what is an insight. An insight is a credible and novel finding tied to a clear so what. And if we break that down, credible, it's something you believe. The data is coming in, crap in, crap out. Have you guys heard that phrase when it comes to data processing? If you're not collecting good data, you're not going to get good answers. The novel piece is it's not water is wet. If you already know that this is doing something and it's plain as day, that's not that exciting. That's not really an insight. People buy umbrellas more when it rains. Oh, okay, that's great. And then the clear so what is what you should do next. When I present data to clients, I always want to contextualize it of what we should do next. If you don't, then they just go, oh, okay, yeah, that was interesting, okay, and then you walk out and they do nothing. It's almost like if a tree falls in the woods, did anyone hear it? If you present a whole bunch of data and nothing happens, does it matter? Did it happen? So, yeah, I don't know. I got to work on my transitions. That's something I got to work on. That's gonna be next year's Integrate is my transitions between slides, because that's something I'm still working on. So you can see we have a couple. Google has a couple platforms, and by the way, I don't work at Google and Facebook anymore. All these opinions are of my own, so I get to be a little bit more candid with you guys now that I don't work at either. So yay! But you can see there's a lot of platforms, and we saw in Bob's presentation this morning, of the time spent with the different apps, a lot of them are Google and Facebook. And because you're spending so much time in interacting with these things, we get to learn a lot about people as a whole. So, for instance, can you guys guess what this graph is? This is search query. So this is how many times someone typed, or how many times everyone types in a given keyword. And now it spikes regularly in April every year. There's a big spike. Can you guys guess what it is? Yep, when are my taxes due? Apparently, people were really nervous in 2017 versus 18 and 16, but you could see there that's a trend. You can go to Google Trends, type in whatever you want, and learn about what people are searching for, even in real time, like within the day. So how about this one? This one from last year. If you guys saw this from last year, don't shout it out. But what do you think the autocomplete for why do I feel so? What do you think the most common search is for that? So alone, tired, bloated, lonely, empty, sad, weak, sick, depressed, hot. Compare that with your social media posts, where everything is great and you're on a beautiful beach and you're taking a picture of your legs poolside and you have the best boyfriend in the world. Let me tell you, if you say, why does my boyfriend space or why does my girlfriend space, you learn a lot about relationship problems there that you won't learn about on Facebook. So what I love about autocomplete is it ranks things in order of how many people are searching for it in your area that are searching according to your behavior. Another example which I use for brands is, why does the brand name blank? Now, if you're in corporate communications, if you're in PR, if something's happening, people are going to start asking questions. And if your message is not there to receive or give them the answers, someone else is going to give them the answer. You know, like, why does Heineken smell like pot? That's a great question. You know, I don't know, but maybe they know. Maybe it's the type of hops they use. You know, maybe it's that, you know, it's kind of skunky because whatever. I'm not a huge Heineken fan, but I showed this to Heineken and they had a good laugh, but I'm like, these are serious questions that they're asking. When, right? So here's another example of audience targeting. So after I interviewed at Facebook, I did a remarketing list of the minimum size I think is 100. So I got 96 of my friends' email addresses and the 4 people that interviewed me, and I remarketed to them on Facebook saying thanks for interviewing me. So as they were using the platform on Instagram and Facebook, they saw my thank you letter. So they were like, that's kind of creepy, and I don't think they probably allow for remarketing lists this small anymore because, you know, the whole GDPR and privacy and whatnot. I don't know if they've changed it, but they got a kick out of that one. My buddy Nick Knack, Alex Jack really liked it, you could see. So that's it for that section. How are we doing on time? 2:02. Great, we're killing it. All right, so analogies, they're pretty sweet, right? Here's an example. I gave a talk at a nerd night on politics and game theory, how the Wu-Tang Clan is the German parliament of hip-hop. And it goes into cooperative versus non-cooperative game theory. And because you form a collective, you're able to be a little bit more different as opposed to your Kanye Wests, who are just all in it for themselves. So I go through that, and what I wanted to do with my analogy was relate German parliament and the different groups to the members of the Wu-Tang Clan. And in doing so, it was a little bit more sticky because the people that know that the alternative for Germany is like ODB, I won't say what it stands for, but then you kind of get an understanding, and I go through the different ones and use, you know, stats to kind of link everything together. But again, it makes it more sticky and makes it more human because it's relating to a group, because, you know, you're not going to remember all the German parliamentary major groups. So here's another example of an analogy that I had for a client. This is a client example. Not the graph. I just pulled steep drop. I Googled it, and whatever came up, I have it here. So this is not their metric. But you can see here, like, if you're presenting something like this to a client and it's a metric, they're going to have questions about that. And generally, they're going to freak out. All right? So you have to be ready when you're presenting that kind of information to a client. And you have to have an explanation. So this is for impression share. Are you guys familiar with impression share? Some of you? Well, we'll walk through it. Don't worry. Impression share is basically the number of searches for the search term Smirnoff. We'll use Smirnoff as an example, and as the divider. And you can see the number of times your ad shows up. That's your impression share. So you're wanting to see how many impressions that your ad captures of the possible searches that people make. So if you got 98 impressions on an ad, and there was 100 searches for that, that's a 98% impression share. So I'm just pretending that that's the numbers for the graph. But then what they did was they expanded a whole bunch of new keywords. So now they're doing Smirnoff and vodka. So now they're only capturing 24% of the impression share. Still confused? They were too, because that's how I tried to explain it to them. And it wasn't good enough. So second time around, because they were freaking out and they're like, why did my impression share drop? That's the most important metric. I used an analogy of a shot glass. So your shot glass is all your queries. So there's 100 searches for the term Smirnoff, and 98% of the time your ads show up. So that's a 98% impression share. Now, when you're expanding other keywords, it's no longer a shot glass. It's a tumbler, or it's what do you call that? A rocks glass. There you go. I found the drinker in the room. So we'll hang out later. So now there's 2,400 because it's not just Smirnoff, it's Smirnoff and vodka. So you show up 100 times maybe, so now you got 2 more impressions, but the impression share is only 24%. So when they're looking at a metric without understanding how it works, it causes a lot of freaking out. So this, using a shot glass and a rocks glass, I was able to say, like, this is okay. This is a metric that is fine. But if you want to care about impression share, keep it a shot glass size, and then maybe have other shot glasses for your vodka terms, your other terms, so it's consistent. Because a lot of these underlying metrics, you just look at that one number and you make a decision without understanding how it works. So this was one that really resonated with a liquor company. So yeah. So this is from Road Trip. Who's seen Road Trip? Did you know that movie came out in 2000? 18 years ago. That's crazy. Okay, so in the movie, they're coming home and he's going to fail a philosophy exam. And the brainy guy was like, oh, I could teach, Japanese to a monkey in 46 hours. I have to find relatable material. And it goes through this montage of him explaining philosophy in terms of pro wrestling. So he's like, the Vince McMahon is like the Socrates who started it all, and goes through this whole analogy. And it really resonated with me 18 years ago. And that stuck with me. I couldn't find the video clip, unfortunately, but this will have to do. So that's it for that section. Again, working on my transitions. So the next thing is make the visuals have a point. So we were actually talking, this is the BFD, the Big Effing Deal, which you can remember from the Affordable Health Care Act. But here was something that we were talking about over lunch. Where are you? We were talking about measles over lunch, which, there you are. So we were talking about it, and I was like, I have a graph on measles in my presentation. She's like, I could tell by her face, that's kind of weird. Why do you have a measles? I agree, it is weird. But here's the thing. I really like this graph because it tells a clear point of when the vaccination was introduced, it stopped. I mean, this is a very simple visual to first show, how many thousand people are impacted in the different states, and when it's introduced, it basically almost dies out except for the anti-vaxxers. But I think the point is, I'm putting this up here to communicate that message, so it's a very simple and easy way to understand it. I used to have super complicated visuals with graphs on top of lines, on top of bar charts, and they're like, what the heck is this mess? It took too long for them to get it, so they zoned out. That's why I also use a lot of builds. I don't know if you noticed, but I'm building on top of things. So then I'm asking you guys to only pay attention to one thing as opposed to take the whole thing in at once. Here's another example that I use in presentations. So in 2011, this is average time spent per day in US adults. This was similar to a graph we saw earlier today. And then we fast forward to 2015. Boom, look at digital, it's huge. But within digital, look at that, mobile. Mobile's the big growth driver. 150 times a day you check your cell phone. So, when Bob was talking about this earlier about mobile's important, yes, of course, mobile's important. That's the key takeaway, is look at the growth. It's an important thing to know, and it's very simply shown. If you can get them to arrive at those conclusions without you having to say anything, I could flip, whoops, what the heck did I just do? If you can get them to arrive at those conclusions without you having to, whoops, not share, present. I'm sharing with you guys. If you could just go through it without having to say a word, okay, this is what he's trying to get at. So here's another one, tell a story with a clean structure. Now this was a little difficult for me to follow my own rules for this because it's an hour-long presentation, and usually people don't give me the floor for that long period of time. They usually usher me out after 20 minutes. The salespeople come in and they go, okay, here's the data nerd with the Excel spreadsheet. It's going to bore you to tears. So I only get 20 minutes. So I usually follow this clean structure. Well, this is a bad example of what I used to do. Data, 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 data. It's just a data puke. It's just here's everything, why I'm right. Do this or you die, and then give me all your money. And those were the presentations I used to give to clients. And the thing is, then they have to do the work and go, wait, was the data point in the second slide the one that relates to why I should do this? And the one on the fourth slide, is this why I would die? It's not a clean and organized story structure. So framework, story structures all really help. Here's an example with Google. They have your sales funnel, the awareness, consideration, action, loyalty, see, think, do, care. Unfortunately, that spells out STDC, which when I worked at Facebook, they pointed out, oh, Google's framework is STD. That's kind of weird. But you can see here that it clarifies and creates a language between you and the client to say what type of campaign are you running. My coworker Avinash, she would always say, never judge a frog by its ability to climb a tree. And if you're having an awareness campaign and you want to know what the conversion rate of it is, that's not the point of it. It's how many people saw your ad. What's the reach of your ad? If people are liking, sure, that's a consideration thing. But then what's the action? How many people are buying and how many people are signing up for your program? So if you have a specific program, I want to bucket those metrics and things you care about into one of these four. That way they're not like, well, we reached a lot of people, but it didn't convert very well. So, and then if it converts really well, yeah, but we didn't really reach a lot of people. And those conversations of which metric is the right one, this simplifies it. So what I normally do for my storytelling now is a pretty simple framework, the BFD, why I should care about any of this. And then I have the insight, here's what's going on, here's the graph, here's what you should do, and here's the outcome. And there are 3 tight little stories that relates directly to each other. So then that way it's 1 data point per column, and then it's just like, here's the insight, here's what you should do, and then this is what you're going to get for doing that. You tell the 3 stories, and then you summarize it all together. It makes it really, really simple for you to have presentations that way, and that's also why I did that for this presentation here. So you could see BFD Insight 1. Unfortunately, because I have a full hour, I had to add a couple extra things, a couple more jokes, make it more interesting. But that's roughly the template that I follow when I'm thinking about how do I tell a story to clients that's data-driven. So in summary, tell stories, simplify your presentation, know your audience, learn from your audience, use analogies, make your visuals have a clear point, and have good story structure. Hopefully you got some of those out of this presentation. And if you guys could all do me a favor and make my brother feel really happy, sign up on crabber.com, CRABBR.com, enter your email address, and we'll notify you when we launch in 3 weeks, hopefully in 3 weeks. But if you guys sign up on it, it would be really, really sweet. So that's it. So it looks like we have 15 minutes for questions, right? Around 15 minutes. Great. Any questions? There's one.
Can you share your slides to the website?
Yeah. It's here. Let me show you here. So yeah, just enter your email and your device you have, and I'll notify you. I mean, we haven't built out very much. I've been kind of in stealth mode because I just left Facebook June 1st, so I started working on that a little bit afterwards, and just kind of behind closed doors right now. So don't tell too many of your friends yet. But in 3 weeks we'll be launching. So cool.
What insights you're bringing from working with these mega brands to your own startup? Like, what are you really taking into this small business world that might be applicable for those of us who work with smaller brands every day?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is asking for help. You know, when you're at Google and Facebook, you're surrounded with some of the smartest people, and you have to come in humble. You know, you come in thinking you're a know-it-all, and you quickly learn that every time you learn something new, you realize you don't know anything. And I think the thing is being able to ask for help and saying, hey, I really don't understand this, is a really, really helpful skill that I had to learn, because, you know, the fresh out of college, like, I know everything, you know, my parents know nothing. You know, that kind of attitude is where I started. And what I pulled out of those companies is, like, people are specializing, and people know this better than you do. I mean, with exceptions, but for the vast majority of things, especially when you're starting your own business, you have to be a mile wide and an inch deep, as opposed to a mile deep and an inch wide. You can't afford to not ask for help. You know, work with experts. Try to get people that would say, hey, this is, you know, this could tank your business if you don't think about this. You know, I don't know what I don't know. And I think that's one of the scariest things about starting my own business. And I think what I've learned from working at Google and Facebook is ask a lot of questions and try to come in as humbly as possible. And people are always happy to help.
I work at an agency, and a lot of our clients are smaller and don't necessarily have the tools to collect data, and they don't also know how to link them back to business goals. So we talk about that a lot with our clients on how to make sure that the work that we're doing is tied back to their business goals, but they don't report that back to us all the time. So have you dealt with that with your clients on how to advise them to share business, you know, how they're meeting their business goals? And then I guess I'm just curious how we can tie what we're doing, and like you said, it's all about the end goal. How have you worked with clients on that?
Yeah, and this is one of the questions that comes up most frequently, and the answer is testing. You know, and I think the thing is, a lot of tests are really complicated and accurate, but they don't necessarily see the full picture. And then there's a lot of tests that are really, really simple that capture everything, but you lose a lot of nuance. So one of the things to think about when you're testing and relating things back to business goals is, okay, like, if you're testing television, it's a blunt object. You know, it's something that reaches a lot of people really well. So maybe do it on a market level. Instead of doing a national TV buy, do a buy in a couple DMAs, designated market area, you know, like major cities, and test one city versus the other city. One's dark, one's not, different levels of investment. Testing and optimizing is kind of the way that you should do it, and the less data that you have, the more blunt an object you need to use, or the higher volume, because at the end of the day, your business goals are pallets leaving warehouses, butts in seats, whatever that metric is. And if you're using, it's kind of like if you're trying to measure something and you don't have the tracking one-to-one, you're going to need to have a lot of it so that it shows up in your sales goals. If you're trying to measure, a glass of water in an ocean of investment, it's not going to pan out well for you. So that's kind of the testing and optimizing is the way to relate it back to business goals. But the things that you're testing will indicate whether or not you need a large volume or a small volume, and if it's a simple test or a very complicated test. Does that make sense? I don't know if that answers your question. Hopefully. You guys could ask me anything. It's cool. It doesn't even have to be marketing related. What's up?
Did you convince your brother to go into business, or did he convince you?
I convinced him. So I actually, initially I had to pay him. He's my iOS developer. So the question, just to repeat for the camera there, is did I have to convince my brother? Did my brother have to convince me? So I had to convince my brother. I'm kind of the ideas guy, and my brother's definitely the doer. So he's always afraid to just like take one of my tangent thoughts and run with it. But when I'm like, no, I'm doing this full time, and I'm willing to pay you to build this app. He's like, this is a good idea. What equity am I getting? I'm like, not if I'm paying you, it's zero. And then he's like, all right, well, how about you stop paying me? And that's kind of how it started. So it was me convincing him for sure. The first thing I usually do, and I could either do it over the course of several meetings or within one meeting, which requires a little bit more improv. And what I'll do is the first half of the meeting is just ask a ton of questions. Even if you know their business, like through and through, you still ask them the questions because you want to make sure that what they actually care about and what their business goals and what's keeping them up at night are the things that they care about, and then taking that and relating that to what you're trying to present. So for me, it's first is the fact finding, understanding your audience, understanding the metrics they care about in their terms, then taking what you're trying to present, merging the two, and then having a resolution that answers those questions or at least fixes those things. So that's kind of the framework that I follow when I do like executive summits. It's way less, what's the word? It's way more formal than these kind of presentations, which was why I like these presentations more. But that's usually the framework that I follow, is mostly asking them questions and then providing them the simplest thing, the lowest hanging fruit. You should do this, and if this works, then we'll talk about the next thing. Because if you don't get that ball rolling on the simplest thing that's the easiest layup, they're not going to do any of it. So it's making it very simple and relating it to their business goals.
How did you come up with the name Grab It?
Because it gets you out of your shell in a pinch. And I really, yeah, it's kind of corny. What I like about it is the number of puns I can use for in-app experiences. So you create a collection of points, that's a shell. If you're on offline mode, because when you travel you don't have internet access, that's hermit mode. You start off as a Dungeness crab. The gamification brings you to a king crab. I could go on all day. But the idea is to make it so that there's a cognitive connection to these actions, so that if someone else were to do the same thing, they would have to unlearn my terminology and relearn theirs. Because a tweet is a tweet. If I do a 140 character service, they're going to go, oh, is that a tweet? Are you creating a shell? Are you doing this? So I want to make it so that it's stickier for users, that if a competitor comes in, they have to pull out all the crab language and then re-educate them. Oh, yes. Yes, inner tube. So it's funny. Inner tube water polo, in New York, they have a lot of random things that you could find. There's a social sports league, and I always pick the weirdest thing. My friends always say that I just go to Groupon and say yes to everything, and that's kind of like my social life. But what I really like about inner tube water polo, and it's a social league in New York, it's since closed down, so I'm missing it quite a bit, is that it's such an inclusive sport. Because if you're really, really light, you're fast. If you're really, really heavy, you're hard to flip because you flip each each other. If you're really strong, you're good at throwing the polo ball. So like the matchups against people, and there has to be 5 people in the pool at all times, and 2 of them have to be women, so it's a co-ed team. So it's really, really inclusive, and it's all about matching up, because, you know, like when some, you know, really tiny person's trying to flip me, it's not going to happen. You know, if you have the ball or they do, you get to flip their inner tube, which is really fun. So so it's a goofy sport. I use that term loosely. But it's just brings the weirdest people together, which is like my favorite. I don't know if that answers it. But it's fun. You should all try it. Seriously. Let's start a league. Cool. Any other questions? I think we have another 5 minutes.
Is this on? Cool. When it comes to working for big brands like Facebook and Google, what was your least favorite part about working for them?
Ooh, there. Okay, let me. Can you just fast forward the camera or pause for a sec? No, I think the thing is, like, when you grow to that scale that quickly, there's a lot of white space in terms of what you can do, but then when that gets filled in, there becomes a whole bunch of like, this is my role, it's very specific. You can't wear so many hats because it's such a giant machine. You know, there's guys, and this is, you know, like Google lore is like, you know, one guy's testing the color of the buy button, which color of blue, for weeks. You know, you could imagine that that's something that is very, very in the weeds. So I think that the number one reason why people will leave one of those companies that's large is because they want to wear multiple hats and try different things. So I think that's the biggest downside, is you're in a specific department with a specific role, and people are very protective of their scope. So if you're only the guy who does the blue buttons, and then I decide, I'm like, oh, let's try the green button. He's like, absolutely not. I've been doing this for weeks, you know? So that's kind of it's a little bit harder to like make big movements with a big company, but I think that's the problem with a lot of big companies. But they've been doing a lot of things to try to retain talent by creating like startup incubators within the company. So it's an intrapreneur, and what they'll do is they're like, oh, we're going to lose this person to a startup. We might as well just let them create their startup within our umbrella. So then that way they have the safety of working for Google and Facebook and the free lunches, but not the risk that you would have to take if you were doing it yourself.
When you were initially applying for the position to work for Google, Facebook, what do you think distinguished you as a candidate, and how was the interview process?
Yeah, so what distinguished me? I think a lot of it was I was working with my Google sales reps for a while, and some of the people that worked with me at MediaCom, I was working on the Dell account. And I was on the search team, and I was doing the analytics there, and I was building a whole bunch of like Excel spreadsheets with macros and doing all these formulas and stuff. And when some of them got hired at Google, they said, you should come over. And I applied like 5 times before because I was a fanboy using the, you know, generic application, and I never got a call back. But it wasn't until my friends, you know, and my network were like, hey, this is someone that you should really hire. But they put in my resume, and there was like 15 other people who said, yeah, he would be a good hire, that I actually got in the door to interview. And one of the things with the interview process that was really interesting is I was expecting all the zany questions and things that they ask, like how many ping pong balls could you fit in a 747, or, you know, why are manhole covers round, those kind of questions. They don't ask those anymore. And what the HR department did, which I thought was really, really interesting, was they have your interview questions, and you're typing as you're talking, they're talking to you. So they're typing in your answers, your responses, rating them, and then they correlate those ratings with your performance ratings over time in the company. So they'll look at which questions are the best indicators for high-performing employees for the next 3-5 years. So they do a really data-driven approach even to their interviewing process. So it's a little awkward when someone's typing while you're trying to talk to them, and sometimes it's a little awkward doing it over video chat when you're like talking to people in other offices. But you know, because it's a data-driven approach, a lot of the questions that were kind of wacky melted away, and it was more job-specific questions. So I don't think I can share the questions. Sorry. That's a good question, and I think that's just like the evolution of a small company becoming a big company. You know, when you're starting something new, it could be in your vision, and you have strong culture, and you have like everyone's pushing, you guys are the underdogs, you know. But then when you are at the top of something, now you have to maintain. And when you're maintaining, you have to prevent loss and grow. And I think that creates a lot of pressure in terms of like from the metrics and this, Wall Street and that. You have to grow by 20 or 30% or you miss your earnings and then your stock plummets and everyone's unhappy. So I think that the metrics driven is just kind of the evolution of companies going from small to big. So similar to the question I was asked earlier, what's one of the downsides of working for those companies? It would be the reliance on metrics and the evolution. And I think the curmudgeon old people at these companies are like, back in my day, we didn't have to worry about that and we could drink beer on our lunch break. But that doesn't happen anymore. So, I think it's just natural progression of companies growing. Cool. All right. Well, thanks for the time, guys. Hopefully you learned something or not. I don't know.